And I'm going to go ahead and do a little introduction.
Sounds good.
So for everyone who's here, thank you for coming. And I think we'll have more people trickling in as we go. This is just where I'm here in France at the Dora Maar House, and Susan is in New York in her lovely office. And this has been this wonderful thing we've been able to do, or these webinars with some of our alumni who've gone on to complete projects that many were started here while they were in residence. And Susan was here at the Dora Maar House in 2011, and I think you started this project then. Is that?
I did indeed.
So just as a little introduction, Susan is an arts journalist and film historian based in New York City. Her books include Dudley Murphy, Hollywood Wild Card, that was 2006, and Weiwei, Circle of Animals, that came out in 2011. I remember it came out sort of when you arrived here.
Yes, yeah.
And Soundies and the Changing Image of Black Americans on Screen, One Dime at a Time. Here's my copy. Everyone needs to, after this, go out and buy their copy. Published late this last year, 2021, by Indiana University Press. Susan works at the intersection between film and art, a former film programmer at the Met. She's written and lectured on such topics as Ballet, mécanique, the influence of silent films of the art, and René Magritte, and photographer Helen Levitt as a cinéaste. And it's just been so lovely to read this book and to prepare with Susan to do this webinar. So I'm really glad to have you all with us. And please, if you're interested in other webinars, we have them periodically. Go ahead and go to our website, the Dora Maar House. Maison Dora Maar, I should say, actually. Yeah. MaisonDoraMar.org, and you can sign up for our newsletter. So I think we're going to start with Susan doing an introduction to Soundies. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. For those of you who don't know what Soundies are, Soundies were 3-minute music films of a type that were called jukebox movies. They were made to be shown outside of theaters on machines called movie jukeboxes. And these machines were found wherever a music jukebox might be. In other words, bars, taverns, restaurants, bus stations, train stations, anywhere people might gather. Now, strictly speaking, Soundies are a brand. It's a proprietary brand of a jukebox movie made to be shown on a specific brand of a movie jukebox called the Panorama. In 1940 and 1941, there were dozens of movie jukebox startups, but Panorama Soundies was the only one to actually make it as a business. They were in business from 1940 to early 1947. In that time, they made and released not quite 1,900 Soundies, mostly in weekly reels of 8 films each, which Panorama operators would then install in their machines. I have, can I screen? Yeah, I can screen share. I have a few quick images for you. And the last 2 I'll say are courtesy of the Mark Cantor archive. This first one and the one right after it are from a booklet made for prospective Panorama buyers. And here you see the model putting her dime into a Panorama. And this is the screen right by her head. It is a ground glass screen, and the movie was rear projected onto it through a series of mirrors in the body of the machine, to the point where with the mirrors, Soundies were printed reversed left to right, so that a sign would read backwards if it was going to be projected on this machine. Now, at the top is a small speaker. There's another one down at the bottom. And this here is a rotating paper strip. It's like a marquee that advertised what was in the reel that week. And now I'll do a new share. This is the top of the machine opened, and there you can see the speaker. And here is this really intricate route that the paper marquee would take. It's like a closed loop. But you can see that these were really kind of complicated machines to maintain. Here's the cover of the Soundies catalog, second edition, covering 1942 and 1943. As you can see, we are in the thick of the pinup era. There were pinups everywhere during the war, and they have never before or since been seen as so wholesome and family friendly. And Soundies were right in there with that. There are a lot of legs in these films of every race and ethnicity, but only one gender. And then we have a program flyer for a specific program of 8 Soundies. And on this program, you can see that Lena Horne is getting pretty prominent play here. Horne had big hits in Hollywood in 1943. This is a program from 1945. So she was already pretty much established as, you know, an up and coming star. She had starred in Stormy Weather and Cabin in the Sky in 1943. But she never actually appeared in front of a Soundies camera. Her Soundies were clipped from short films that she'd made in 1941 before she became a star. Now, but the fact that she's so prominent here kind of gives us an indication that for a lot of Soundies audiences, Black and white, the Black cast films were really popular. At that time, there was still an active Black film industry and movie houses serving Black audiences. And race films, as they were called, were made well into the 1940s. But white audiences had limited access to those films, and Hollywood, if anything, was cutting down on the number of Black performers that it was using. So marginal as they were, Soundies were an important platform for Black performers who were looking to reach both Black and white audiences through film. And that's partly because Soundies were a business. They were going to do what made money. And if films with Black performers were going to pull in the dimes, then they were going to make those films. I don't know if you can see it, probably not, but the last line of this paragraph here says, "This program will bring in those shekels. Need we say more?" So, all right, I will stop the share now. This book that I wrote is not the book that I started out to write. I was going to write a broad general history of Soundies because they are such an interesting episode of media history and they are still so little known. But out of those 1,900 or so Soundies that were made, there were roughly 325, about a fifth of the total, that starred and featured Black performers. And as I started to work on the book, it really did not take long to see that those 325 films were really the story. Not only because so many of the performers in these films are just, the talent is so extraordinary, but there is also so much history embedded in these films of the country at a time of war, but more specifically, the racial dynamics of that era. And it's basically told through the medium of pop music and movies. And the more I watched, the clearer it became that Black cast Soundies were a space where the depiction of Black people was being worked out almost on a week-by-week basis. And in this, Soundies were way ahead of Hollywood, where Black people were still being depicted in stereotypes and caricatures, if they were being depicted at all. Now, not all, but the great majority of Black cast Soundies portray Black people as cosmopolitan, contemporary figures with what scholars call active agency. In these films, they play a distinctive part in defining what modern meant in America in the 1940s. From late 1941 to early 1946, almost every weekly reel included one Black cast Soundie, sometimes two. These films were so popular, in fact, that from 1943 to 1945, the company made additional Black cast Soundies beyond the ones in the weekly reels. So Panorama operators could add Black cast Soundies to the reels that they were showing their audiences. But I also have to say that the racial dynamics of Soundies audiences was not entirely progressive. There was pushback, and I go into that in the book too. But now maybe let's watch a Soundie. And we have picked for our first Soundie, Hot Chocolate Cottontail. Duke Ellington was probably the most high profile star, Black or white, to appear in Soundies. So it just seemed to make sense to start with one of his. Ellington was also a strong advocate for Black dance. And in this film, he and his orchestra share screen time with Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, which was the premier jitterbug troupe of the late 1930s and 1940s. I just want to say one quick note. All of the Soundies that I talk about in the book and that are available on YouTube, including the Ellington Soundies, have been uploaded to my website, susandelson.com, in chapter order. So as you read the book, you can easily watch the films that you're reading about, or if you just want to watch the films, they're all there. So Gwen, do you want to show the film?
I'm going to do a screen share. Let's see. Okay, so it's not working as I had hoped. Never
Why
does.
am I not surprised?
Yeah, let me see if I can do this. Let's see, go back to here. Okay, now I'm going to screen share this, and then do a big thing. Do you see it?
No, I see. Yeah, here it is. Great.
We noticed was not great, so people might have to turn the sound up on their computers. Wow. Oh, wait, oh, sorry. I don't know where that's coming from. Escape. Okay, are we back?
We are back, and we've gotten a couple of comments that the reception on the film was a little jumpy. Either the sound, some people got the sound very clearly, but a jumpy picture, and some people got jumpy on both sides.
Oh,
I think that may be a drawback on sharing YouTube's on Zoom, but
yeah.
And that may not be something that we can fix in this hour, but we're not showing a huge number of the films. And I will say again, they're on my website. If you want to watch Hot Chocolate without the stutter, go to chapter 5.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're in a medieval village. Our internet's not great. So, you know, already the internet coming here and then me putting it, so.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. All right.
So they're incredible, the Lindy Hoppers. Can you say something about them, Whitey's Lindy Hoppers? Because I'm just like agog at that dancing. Amazing.
Well, they came out of the Savoy Ballroom, which was the most competitive dance floor in Harlem. And they, by the time they made this, they were already well known in Hollywood. They had appeared in several movies. I think a Marx Brothers film in the late 30s. They had a fabulous sequence in the movie Hell's a Poppin'. They were really very well known at this point. And the most famous member of the troupe is Frankie Manning, who was really instrumental. He was in the last couple to do the solo dance in the film. He was really instrumental in choreographing the Lindy Hop and really innovating the choreography. He was known for what they called the air step, which was a lot of the throws and the, sort of up in the air parts of the dance routine. But the oldest surviving member of the troupe, who was also in that ensemble, is Norma Miller, who died at the age of 99 in 2019. And she, up until virtually the day she died, she was very involved in the swing dance revival and was teaching seminars all over the place. And in fact, hang on, I'm just going to take a look. What is it called? There is a book called Jumpin' the Color Line by Susie Trenka. And she is a swing dancer who I think took seminars with Norma Miller in Sweden. And so she is looking at the whole swing dance phenomenon from the point of view of someone who actually physically does it. So that's what I think for now I can tell you about.
So they were called Lindy Hoppers. It was after Charles Lindbergh, is that right?
Yes, they were. The Lindy Hop was called that because of Charles Lindbergh's, I guess, transatlantic.
Right.
And also they were Whiteys because it was, I can't remember his first name, whether it was Arthur or something else, but they were managed by someone whose last name is white and who found, who sort of spotted these dancers at the Savoy and put together this troupe.
Do a lot of the Soundies have dance like this in them?
This is sort of the top of the line, but dance was such an important component of Soundies. And because it was a really important component of life in the war, in the home front, everybody was dancing. In the 30s, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers were dancing. In the 40s, everybody was dancing. And it was probably the only time that there were something like 2,000 factories around the country that had dance floors as part of their recreational facilities. So people working the swing shift could, take their 4 a.m. break and go do a couple of jitterbugs and go back onto the floor. So yes, dance was it was there in the culture, and it was there in Soundies for sure.
Can you talk about one of the breakout stars of Soundies? I think I read a chapter about it in your book about Dorothea Dandridge.
Dorothy Dandridge, she was definitely one of the first real stars to emerge from Soundies. And Dandridge had been performing since she was a child with her sister, but also and another woman. They were who wasn't a sister, but they was billed as a sister.
I just want to ask you, is it Etta James, who's also the jazz singer?
It's a different Etta James.
Okay.
It's a different Etta James. Okay. Her name was Etta James, but it was not the same Etta James. But Soundies were an important step for Dorothy Dandridge in establishing her solo adult persona. So many of people in the Soundies audience had basically watched her grow up as a child performer on the Black theatrical circuit. And so this was a really important step in establishing her identity as a solo performer.
Okay, so why don't we play the Soundie? I'm going to try to play the Soundie that we have.
All right. And again, bear with us. It's probably stuttery, and just think of it as a series of film stills.
Yeah, exactly. Let me see if I can do it. I think there it is. Share, and I make it big. And you see it?
Not yet, but maybe, yeah, there we go.
Okay. Oops. Sorry.
I was a kid, so my dream would say, you don't look like so keen that you scream, oh, here comes my walking rainbow, so make a super, I was the reason, I was the great shape, and a stuff, come to look sharp enough to see my funny gal. I was a gal with a laptop with a hip slip, a lace waist in the sharpest tape, see my Sunday man. Hat with a trim brim, that to look plenty hip. Yes, the one look clean, but you say she like a fella. So, baby, you sure look better. So make brown gown with a top, hip slip, and a lace waist and sharpest tape. See my Sunday man. gal. I got a brown gal with a zop top, a hip slip, and a lace waist in the sharpest taste. See my fancy thing. And look, like people say, you don't look like they both. I've seen that ice cream. You can smell walking rainbow. I got a suit with the weekend and some flat in the ladies' bag.
I have to stop, and I have to stop the thing. Ah! Okay, escape. Okay, sorry, one day I'll get this right. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to us about the zoot suit, and I know the sound was very low on that. I tried turning it up. I hope people could hear it, but anyway.
Yeah, no, yeah, we could hear it. I mean, for me, it's still pixelated on the screen, but you know, it's widely available on YouTube, and it is on my website. So it's worth seeing if you haven't seen it. If this is your introduction to it, you should probably make a point of trying to see it in a steady flow. The first thing I should say is, whatever it is Paul White was wearing when he left the tailor's, it was not a zoot suit. And there's a reason for that. You know, zoot suits, they were a fashion phenomenon that started up just as the war was starting. They had really long jackets with wide shoulders and wide high-waisted pants with tight cuffs. They were very popular among younger people, particularly among young Black and Mexican American men. But they took yards of fabric. And as the war went on and fabric and clothing were maybe not rationed, but restricted, zoot suits became a flashpoint for issues of patriotism and the war effort. And I do talk about that in the book. But I will say here, in Los Angeles in June of 1943, more than 1,000 white people, mostly sailors and soldiers, attacked Black Americans and Mexican Americans, mostly young men, in what became known as the Zoot Suit riots. But when this film came out, which was in March of 1943, zoot suits were still just a hot fashion, and the song was already popular. I think Bing Crosby had recorded it. It was, you know, at that point, a lot of different people would record a song. It wasn't like, you know, one artist records it and they own it. A lot of different versions were going around. And I think the film just has a lot of fun with that sense of style. And the thing is, with zoot suits, you could do exactly what they were doing in the film, which was specifying the details of their outfits. Zoot suits were custom or semi-custom tailored, and envisioning your suit was always seen as an exercise in creative self-expression.
And a little, first of all, I think I wrote this to you. I remember very vividly when I first read the autobiography of Malcolm X, him talking about zoot suit.
Yeah.
Zoot made. And what was also interesting to me is this sort of question early on about patriotism in the war in terms of Black Americans and their kind of ambivalence, maybe, about fighting in this war. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, as in the beginning, it was, and this has a bearing on the next.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later, yeah.
Yeah, the next film that we're going to see. In 1940, when the government established the first peacetime draft, it was a struggle for Black Americans to be accepted into service. And as you say, there was, on top of that, there was this ambivalence because Black Americans threw their support wholeheartedly behind World War I, expecting to reap the benefits of that. that level of support and cooperation and patriotism. And basically they didn't. And so there was some feeling of, not wanting to go down that road again. There was also a certain feeling, less with the Germans. I think the surveys that they did, Black people were, very against the Germans and what they stood for, but they had a different feeling about the Japanese because they were people of color. They thought they might be treated better in a situation with the Japanese.
Yeah, and I actually also heard this recently at a conference on World War II. The Japanese themselves did a lot of propaganda towards African Americans about, that we're also not white and we understand suffering and don't let, So it was part of the strategy as well of the Japanese at that point. Yeah.
Well, there was, I think it's less well known. There was a tremendous amount of Black activism throughout World War II to be adequately represented in the military, to be part of the suddenly booming wartime economy, to be brought into defense plant jobs, to be brought into government jobs, because there was, after a decade or more of the Depression, there was finally some economic growth, and there was a real determination on the part of the national Black community that Black people were not going to be left out of this. And it took a tremendous amount of pressure. The whole reason there was any kind of affirmative action in federal contracts with defense plants is because Philip Randolph was organizing a March on Washington, and FDR had to, with like days to spare, finally authorized a bill. It really took a lot of activism there was real progress made during the war, but none of it came easily, not at all.
And before we show the next one, there was another thing I wanted to touch on with the zoot suit, which is also part of what you're just talking about. This is also the period of the Great Migration, and you have this whole new sort of urban African-American population, and that's sort of like reflected a lot in the Soundies, right? The sort of urban, hip slang, urban cool that gets to be during that time.
The Great Migration started decades before, but it really accelerated during the war, and it moved in different directions. There was a significant migration to California because that's where a lot of the aircraft industry was. There were a lot of good jobs out west, not just California, but also up the West Coast, Washington State, Kaiser Permanente had, maybe just Kaiser at that point. Maybe Permanente is just later health plan. But Kaiser had a huge, huge shipyard up in the Bay Area. There was a lot that was pulling people out of the South, basically. There were people going up to Detroit, was an enormous defense center. So there were already established Black communities in a lot of the North, but there was new migration to the West and new waves of migration in the North. And, but the thing is, it wasn't just Black people who were leaving the South. It was largely the upper tier, like the Appalachian states and Texas. There were white people coming out of those states also going into other regions of the country. And the thing about the Soundies, the Black cast Soundies, is that they kind of became this sort of handbook or this like guide to like being urban for everybody, not just Black newcomers, but all newcomers. This was, you know, they were this index of acclimation to city life, to urban life, and mastery of urban life. And a lot of that had to do with style. You know, that's why, you know, suddenly the zoot suit was something important.
Right. Okay. I think we should go ahead and show the next film, which is the last one we were going to show, which is really about the war. It's because Soundies really span the period of the war, since they were from 1940 to 1947. And so, is there anything you want to say before
Yeah, I do. You know, as I said, it was a struggle for Black people to get into military service. And there were, you know, despite the ambivalence, there were a lot of people who really wanted to serve. And it took a lot to get people in. I just wanted to say that in 1940, you know, as the war was gearing up, there were only 4,700 out of 500,000 men in the regular army. That's like roughly 1% who were Black. And once Black people were accepted into the service, Black troops were assigned to segregated labor units that basically supported the white troops who were engaged in combat. And despite years of protest and pressure, it wasn't until 1944 when Black troops finally began to officially see combat duty. And this soundie, Hey Tojo, Count Your Men, was released a few weeks after the first Black combatants actually saw action in the South Pacific. Now, when I say the title is Hey Tojo, Count Yo Men, I do mean yo instead of the word your. You'll see the title has Y-O apostrophe. And it turns out that this song, which is celebrating the first Black troops in combat, was written by two white old timers in the music industry, one of whom had run a touring minstrel show in the 1920s and 30s, which is probably where the yo came from. So I say this as a way of illustrating that things did not change all at once in Soundies. It was, you know, they have this kind of off-kilter inconsistency, this push and pull, this contradiction, a lot of them. And I definitely go into that a lot more in the book. But, you know, it just wasn't this like sort of smooth, progressive wave. Soundies were messy, they contradicted themselves. And yes, there is sometimes a touch of minstrel show bouncing around in the background because it was still in the culture at large. This was a time when stars like Judy Garland and Bing Crosby were still appearing in Hollywood movies in blackface. But one more thing about Hey Tojo, there is this sort of throwaway kicker at the very end where the singer, Bob Howard, calls out Japanese Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, the Emperor Hirohito, and all you Japs with the slanty eyes, which is to say, this was an era when racism moved in a lot of different directions. But it was also a time when images of Black men in uniform with guns were not appearing in the culture at large, or very, very rarely. And they were appearing in Soundies. They were on panorama screens. And despite the yo in the lyrics, which Bob Howard pronounces your, the film celebrates men and their service. And the broader culture was not doing that at the time. So
let me share this.
the South Pacific, there was a group of fighting men who were terrific. A singing, swinging gun crew was Battery B, shooting their gun and making history. A boom went the cannon, went the shell, they got up the shovel and then they yelled, hallelujah, 8, 9, 10, hey, Tojo, count your men. Wham with another verse from the gun, hey, look out, man, all of a solid one. Hallelujah, 8, 9, 10, hey, Tojo, count your men. They had rhythm when they load their gun. Then they pointed at the rising sun. And when their aim was perfect, their eyes would gleam. Till the sergeant hollered to them on the beam. Boom with the cannon, zoom with the shell. Then would come the answer the Japs knew well. Hallelujah! 8, 9, 10, hey, told ya!
I just want to escape here. Okay. Do you see me? Are you back? Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
They're back.
Okay. So I don't know if there's some questions in the audience. We can take, if anyone has questions that they want to type into the chat. But no, please feel free and we'll answer them. But I was also going to ask you, what do you think the lasting effect of Soundies were? I mean, they kind of were short-lived in terms of the history of them, but did they, what kind of trail do you think they left?
It's so interesting that you mentioned that, because I am going to be presenting a program at the Film Forum, which is a well-known repertory theater, a movie house here in New York City. It's part of a series about New York City's movie-making renaissance from 1945 to 1955. And the series itself was inspired by a book by a wonderful film historian named Richard Kaczarski. And he has in his book a whole chapter on how Soundies and the race film industry that kind of sprang up around it and in the aftermath basically kept independent film production going in New York City during a very sort of dry period, which eventually then picked up again. And that was a result of Soundies that I had not really thought about. I hadn't thought about them in the film industry term because they are such an outlier, they were so marginal and so under the radar, but they apparently had a really important part to play in sort of maintaining a level of professional involvement in New York City that then was able to be built upon as the 50s progressed, and probably not just in film, but also in television. But
one of the questions that someone asked is, was there a connection to Harlem? Just because I don't know if we said about how they were made in different places, the Soundies, isn't that correct?
They were made in different places, largely in New York and in Los Angeles, primarily Hollywood. They had a production structure that was almost the exact opposite of the Hollywood studio system, which was tight and controlled and centralized. Soundies were diffuse. They were all over the place. It was there, by one count, there were like 45 different small independent production companies that made films for Soundies, that the Soundies company commissioned or whatever. But most of the Soundies with Black performers, the great majority of them were made in New York. And Harlem was an incredibly important part of that. The most prolific Soundies producer was a white man named William Forrest Crouch, but he worked very closely with a person named Fritz Pollard, who had been just a football great. He's in the Football Hall of Fame. But in the 40s, he was a sort of an entertainment impresario, and he had a studio on 125th Street in Harlem, Suntan Studio, which basically became an integral part of the production of Black cast Soundies. He was like a talent scout. He was a rehearsal coordinator. He worked very closely with Crouch in getting those Black, the actual filming took place in the Bronx, but probably everything up to the filming took place in Harlem. And also, Harlem is the scene of so many of the Black cast films. It's like Harlem is like a shorthand for cosmopolitan sophistication and style. It's like you say Harlem and everybody knows what you're talking about.
Right. Mona wanted to know if the Soundies resulted in or helped Black film ownership. She was asking about Oscar Michaud. Do you know what that is? Part of the Soundies.
I know about Oscar Michaud. Soundies. Oscar Michaud was, I think, in the later part of his career. He started out in silent film. He was in the later part of his career, during the time that Soundies were being done. He was not directly involved in Soundies. I don't think they really there was any overlap there at all. But there was one Black producer on the Soundies roster, and that is a person named William D. Alexander. And what he did was he would make short music films, longer than Soundies, films maybe 10 or 20 minutes, something like that, that would have several musical numbers in them. And he would then clip the 3-minute performances, sell them to the Soundies company, which would then present them as Soundies and credit him as the producer. And this was in the later years of Soundies, when it was really difficult for them to keep up with their production schedule, and it's very important to them.
They were making 8, reels of 8 every week, right?
Every week.
So it's
that if they were really going to do that, that's 416 films a year.
Right.
And I don't think there is a single year where they actually made that many films. Right. They recycled them, they clipped them from old films. They had a lot of challenges in terms of filling those reels.
Aside from Dorothy Dandridge, who is so fabulous, I just love her. Who were some of the most thrilling people you discovered in your Soundies research?
Oh, let's see. The people that I just, that I love to watch over and over. I don't know if everybody knows of Sister Rosetta Tharpe, who is sometimes called the godmother of rock and roll, also comes from a very solid gospel background. She was the vocalist for Lucky Millinder and his orchestra for a year or two, and they made Soundies together. And she has like 3 Soundies that just they just knock your socks off. I think June Richmond is a wonderful discovery. And there's also this group that I think I've told you about, the 4 Ginger Snaps.
Yeah, we're gonna maybe watch that at the end, right? Are they wearing?
Yeah.
Okay,
I love them. I love them. And again, you'll probably get a syncopated visual, but they're just, and definitely turn the sound up on them, because I know that one is low.
Yeah. I have another question here. Did the Soundies legacy influence some way in 1946 and 47 the short film of The House I Live In, which Paul Robeson was replaced by the young Frank Sinatra? Do you know?
I don't know. I have not seen anything written that connects them. But if it was, I think it will depend largely on whether it was made in New York or in Los Angeles, because Soundies hung on at the very end, mostly in New York. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're kind of at the end of our time. That's been wonderful. I'm sorry, the technical, we're just not high tech here. But if it gives you a sense, I really encourage you to go to Susan's website, susandelson.com. I encourage you to buy the book. It's really worth it. And we thought that what I just put on at the end, just for, for those who get a good reception, is this final Soundie, which both Susan and I love. And I think that's all. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, Susan?
I don't think so, but just to thank everybody for coming. I really, it's wonderful to know that you're out there.
And thank you so much, Susan, for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, so I'm going to try to do my last technical thing, which is,
okay.
Wait, I have to share the screen. Here we go. Share and make it big. And
Hey, boys, buddy. I can do it, so can you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again.